Scream 1996. It's quite a crude movie. I don't think Wes Craven was a particularly brilliant filmmaker. He came from his 70s, and at the time I think substance was more important than style and technique. I would argue he predates MTV, and I think there's probably a lot more to say for his abilities psychologically and just generally on substance. He was very talented and good at doing things that were psychologically scary. Certainly, some of his movies were massive hits, and he was a master of horror. But as an actual filmmaker, I think he was quite nuts and bolts. I recently watched The Hills Have Eyes Parts 1 and 2 and A Nightmare on Elm Street, and they are, as I was saying, nuts and bolts movies from a filmmaking point of view. Scream was not written by Wes Craven, so the substance doesn't really come from him, and therefore, as a filmmaker, it's his technique and style is more important than his substance because, as I was saying, he did not write it. And therefore, I feel Scream anyway it's more relevant to talk about his technique rather than his substance. And he, I do feel Scream is quite a crudely put together movie. Some of it's not necessarily all that well made, to be honest with you. I don't think it's all perfectly fine and decent, but I don't think it's not a scary movie. I don't think the jump scares are all that well done. And it's an actual problem with the movie is that there are a lot of made up non-narrative jumps in the movie. What I mean by that is people will be startled by a friendly person who suddenly comes up and taps them on the back of the shoulder, or a cat jumps out, or whatever. You know, scares that were probably not written in the script and were added during filming, and it's cheap jump scares that have no actual narrative purpose. And this movie has a lot of those. Not just a few, a lot of them, and it makes the movie a lot trashier than it really should be. These jump scares really don't add anything and would be better removed. I'm thinking of Henry Winkler, I think his name is, the guy who plays the principal. He gets startled when he looks in a mirror at his own face, and it's a case of why? It's just a really badly done sequence. Anyway, it was very famous in its day for being self-referential, which, looking at it nowadays, it doesn't really amount to more than a few rather banal lines of dialogue about other horror movies. Maybe I'm being slightly harsh on it, but from my point of view, the self-referential stuff did not amount to a whole great deal. The film is entertaining, but it's not particularly great. I didn't mind it. The kills are not very imaginative. For a slasher movie, it's curiously, for a franchise, it curiously doesn't have particularly good murder scenes. The second movie has some more elongated, flashier murder scenes, but even them, in the end, it's still just simple knife attacks where people get a knife in the face, or a knife in the chest, or a knife in the back. Friday the 13th, for example, would have had most of the movies would have some inventive alternative killing methods, but Scream never really went that direction, which is odd, I think. It's a decent movie. There is a lot to like about it, and there's no denying its cultural impact, that it is the biggie, the big slasher movie of its era. But I don't think it's all that wonderful. It's dated quite a bit. Some of the acting's a wee bit poor. The two murderers who their motives are rather questionable, but it works more or less. It adds up adequately, and but the problem is those two actors I think were actually quite poor. Just has a very awkward style. You either like it or you don't, I suppose. But I find the movie is a wee bit crudely made, and part of that crudeness is some of the acting is a wee bit on the rough side. Those two actors, as I said, are not the smoothest of actors. So I would give Scream 1 6 out of 10, above average. Scream 2, 1997, I think is slightly better. It's a wee bit smoother. There's less of the bullshit, out of nowhere, non-narrative, cheap jump scares, which, as I said in the first movie, there are a lot of them. I think there's only a handful in the second movie, and the murder scenes are slightly more impressive, a wee bit more elongated, and turned into sort of big, almost De Palma style set pieces, you could almost say. But just more is made of the murder scenes or the suspense sequences. The big Achilles heel of the movie, though, is the end, the reveal, which apparently during the production, who the killers were was changed while they were filming it because a script had leaked or something. But anyway, I can only talk about the final movie, and the reveal when the killers come on is just totally random. Oh, if it just appears to have just been, we randomly chose that person, and so I think the ending comes and I just shrugged, whatever, and it's disappointing. So the movie has a bit of an anticlimax. But I think it's just a slightly slicker, slightly better made movie, and I enjoyed it a wee bit more than the first movie. As I say, the first movie is a little on the crude side. Scream 2, I would give 6 out of 10. Scream 3, 2000. I actually think the first hour's quite strong. I like the first hour. It's probably even better than the first two movies. The self-referential stuff is slightly lacking, doesn't amount to more than a few lines of dialogue in the first and second movie. The second movie doesn't do that much with the self-referential stuff. The third movie is when they really cranked it up and it becomes more of an actual important part of the story, and there's just more of it. I think it's quite enjoyable, actors playing the characters from the first and second movie. It's Neve Campbell is supposed to be the lead, but she's curiously absent for quite a bit of the movie. She doesn't feel very integrated into the main plot, at least for a large chunk. She is separate, doing other stuff, and so Courtney Cox and David Arquette get more to do. It's more their movie than hers, and then she kind of walks in and takes over for the third act, or at least shares the third act with those other actors. It's the self-referential stuff's a bit more substantial and is integrated into the story a bit more. I think the humour had been turned up a bit. It was slightly more overtly comic, and it was actually quite amusing, I think. Some of it, I actually really was digging the movie for the first hour, and I have no idea when it happens, but it just sort of drifts into indifference after about maybe an hour, and the last near hour is for some reason just not as interesting, and I don't know why. And then you get the climax, the reveal of who the killer is, and it is so random and so a character who was barely even a bit part player in the story who had maybe three scenes, minor scenes of no great importance. Oh, it's that person, the biggest shrug in the world. So, and the backstory they came up with from out of nowhere that was clearly retconned into the story about the Neve Campbell's mother's past. And anyway, the reveal at the end is very poor. I really did not like that. I was very disappointed. And I just think the movie drifts off and it's just not as good. So I would give Scream 3 6 out of 10. So that's the first three I have given 6 out of 10. Scream 4 2011. I actually think Scream 4 is the best of the series. In the 11 years since the third movie was made, perhaps a certain amount of Wes Craven developed maybe a bit more style or something. I just feel it's the fourth movie's the best made of them. It's the best directed. It's slicker. It's a bit more technically impressive, I think. I think also the writing might be slightly better. The self-referential stuff about reboots and remakes that were happening in that era feels oddly substantial, and it's not as tacked on as some of the self-referential stuff is in the first two movies. It, I don't think it really amounts to anything, the self-referential stuff, but it just feels oddly substantial and is quite an interesting target. Reboots, remakes, no one really likes remakes and all the rest of it. I think it has probably the best supporting cast. I wouldn't say the characters are better because they're all slightly underwritten. I don't think the supporting cast was ever that well written in any of the movies, but I think it's, I guess the fame of Scream was substantial by the time they made number 4, and so they could get slightly more impressive, famous actors to play minor roles. The two actors playing the cops are recognisable actors, and anyway, I think the supporting cast is actually just stronger than in the previous movies, and I think it's just a pretty good, solid story. And I think probably the movie's biggest plus is Emma Roberts. She is a good actress and has a certain charisma to her that a lot of other actors don't have. And well, the really good thing about it is the reveal at the end. Movie one's reveal is okay, I think. Movies 2 and 3 is just too random. Movie 4, although the motivation is probably totally nonsensical and makes very little sense, it is because of the actor and the dialogue that actor is given, the motivations of why they do what they do. It is very strong. It feels organic and integrated to the story. It's not just a random from out of nowhere, oh, this is the killer. It feels like it's an important part of the story. It's not totally random. And the actor stroke character is very hissable, a real hissable character who you can really go, oh, I hate this person. This person is such an awful person. And so instead of shrugging with indifference, you have an emotional reaction and you get invested in it. And you want to see this person not get away with it. That is a definite plus point. So I think the fourth movie is just slicker, has the best ending of them, and maybe it has slightly better kills than in the first movie and the third movie. I think if you're talking about kills, I think the second movie probably has the best. As I said, it was a wee bit like Brian De Palma, slightly elongated suspense sequences. The murders in the first movie and the third movie are actually pretty weak for slasher. They are unimpressive, not very imaginative. I think the murder scenes in the fourth movie are pretty decent, but the second movie has the best murder scenes, followed by the fourth one probably. And of course, the first movie has the iconic Drew Barrymore opening scene, which I've always felt was overrated. It's a good scene, and maybe it is a big revolution to self-referential stuff, but I've always been sort of, well, yes, it's a good scene, but it's not anything special, in my opinion. So anyway, Scream 4, I would give that 7 out of 10. So, order of my favourite to least favourite movies in the series is 4 is the best, then 2, then 1, then 3. And 3 is not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. It is an unusual franchise in that it was always well financed. It kept a high quality cast who kept coming back from one movie to the next, and they were always well publicised, and some amount of care and effort was taken with the writing. They were not just trashy, thrown together movies. Some real effort, money and effort was put into making them, and it kept the same director made all 4 movies. The same writer wrote 3 of the movies and probably supervised the third movie, which he did not. He does not have a writer's credit, but you have to assume he script doctored it and supervised it to some extent, because he is like an executive producer on the third movie. And of course, we kept the same lead actress and the same key supporting cast keep reappearing. One of the things I really disliked in Scream 3 was the character Randy, played by Jamie Kennedy. He is shoehorned into it, which is fine. That's not the problem. He appears on a videotape, which is a perfectly fine scene, no issues with that. But the way the characters see the video is so awkward. His sister, who we have never seen in the previous 2 movies, suddenly turns up, goes, "Oh hi, I've suddenly turned up in Hollywood instead of in Woodsboro," which is, I assume, where she would be expected to be found. "Oh hi, here's a videotape by the way that Randy made." So we watch a video, and then the sister goes, "Okay, right, bye." I mean, it's like, it could not be worse writing. I almost wonder if it's a deliberate joke. It's deliberately bad. Anyway, that's a digression. So, it's not the most exciting horror franchise, but it's an important one and a significant one, and the movies are consistently good, which is probably a real rarity in a long-running franchise. They didn't even make that many movies, only the 4, which is relatively small. And yeah, the Scream movies, I like them, but I don't love them. I also watched Scary Movie 2000, which, oddly enough, the makers of Scream basically did their own spoof. Okay, it's just made by the same company, Dimension Films, and the Weinstein brothers are executive producers on the Scream movies and Scary Movie. I've always liked Scary Movie. Now, I think a lot of people will go, "How can you like that piece of crap?" The first Scary Movie, I've always thought was a very funny movie. I have laughed myself silly over this movie multiple times. And here we are, 20 years later, I just watched the movie again, and it's still funny. It's not hilarious anymore, but it's still a solid, funny movie. I think it's well put together, and I do actually like the movie. I would give it 7 out of 10. A comedy, but 20 years later. A spoof style comedy as well. That's the type of humour that must date the worst, surely, and it actually holds up. Even like one of the things that must date the most would be the spoof of the Budweiser commercial with the "What's Up." Even if you don't know that commercial and it means nothing to you, if you see the movie and they start doing the "What's Up" stuff, it fits like as a joke in and of itself. It's still quite funny. even if you have no idea about the advert, what they are referencing. And what I found was actually interesting about the movie, though, was that it actually reveals something interesting about the first Scream movie, because essentially it is a remake of Scream. It uses the same plot. Almost pretty much the entirety of the plot of Scream is used in this, with of course jokes added in, and there's references to other movies like I Know What You Did Last Summer. There's even a moment at the end when one of the characters complains and says, "Did Scream have a plot? I don't think so." And I was watching it and I thought to myself, no, actually, Scream does have a plot, and this very movie proves it, because this movie uses the exact same plot of Scream, pretty much Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, almost to an extent, scene by scene, and it really reveals how solid a plot Scream has. I think one of the reasons why Scary Movie holds up all these years later is because it actually has a plot. Because it's borrowing a plot from another movie, it actually has a story to tell. And that's what makes it stand up to scrutiny of multiple viewings, because you can actually sit there and go, yes, this is actually holding up dramatically. It's one of the things, people I think assume comedies don't need strong plots. They just need an excuse to have a bunch of jokes, and the most bare minimum narrative is all that's required. And yes, that can work, but I think the better comedies are better because they have a proper plot. If you can just actually work up a couple of actual real characters and a proper story with a wee bit of complexity to it and stakes, it just works so much better. Plot is more important to comedies than I think most people think. Plus, I think a bunch of the jokes are very funny, and it is actually a solid movie. Of course, the sequels to Scary Movie, that's a different issue altogether. Scary Movie 2 may be the very worst movie ever made.